In a recent project that I was working on, I had to build a calendar view similar to Google Calendar. As I was playing around with Google Calendar, I found it interesting how they implemented the day view. So I thought it would be an interesting video to show you guys how I came up with the approach to achieve a similar view. Let's get started. So I've set up a very basic layout with React and tailwindcss without paying too much attention to styles. If you go to the code, here I'm using dateFNS to get each hour of interval for the selected date. That will be from 12 AM to 11 PM. And I'm mapping through the list of hour and displaying it in the side section. For the first item, I'm hiding the label, and just like how Google Calendar does it. So if we scroll to the top, the 12 AM is hidden. Let's create an event in Google Calendar and we'll try to achieve a similar view in our project. So I'll create an event named event1 and we'll try to replicate this in our project. I'm going to the code. I'll create a variable named event, which will have a start date, end date, and title. I'll name the event event1. For the sake of the example, I'll create all the events for today. Let me get today's date using dateFNS, which will be start of today, and I'll add a few hours from the start of the day. So I'll import the function from dateFNS. The date will be today, and duration I'll add 10 hours. So the event's start date will be 10 AM. Similarly, for the end date, I'll make the event for 1 hour. So the event will start from 10 AM and end at 11 AM. And now let's display the event. I'll create a div here and display event.title for the time being. Going back to the UI, the event is displaying properly. Let's give some styling so it looks similar to Google Calendar. I'll give this a BG of blue for BG blue 400. Text, I'll make the text white. I'll also make the text extra small. Give this a rounded border, PY of 1 and PX 2. Okay, let's see how it looks. Looking good. To place the event in the correct position, we need to give this a position of absolute. So let me go ahead and give a class name of absolute here. And I like to start the event from the right. So I'll give this a right 0. Okay, but we don't want it to start from the absolute right. We want the event to be placed relative to the container. So I'll give the container a class name of relative. Okay, this looks good. If we create multiple events that overlaps with each other, the width of the event dynamically changes depending on how many events overlap with each other. So we need to calculate the width of the event dynamically. So I'll create a function that will give us dynamic styles for the events. I'll create get event style, which will take in an event. This will be type of event, and for the time being I'll just return an empty object. Okay, go back to where we have the event. I'll give this a property of style and get event style and pass in the event. Okay, now we want the event to take 100% minus the width of this side section. So I'll check how much width the side section is containing. So I'll inspect the element and click on the side section. If we click on the computed, we'll see this section is occupying 127 pixels. So I'll return a property of width, which will be a CSS function calc 100% minus 127 pixel. Okay, let's go back to the UI. Now let's place the event in the correct position. Our event starts from 10 AM and finishes at 11 AM. So we need to place the event between these two lines. To give the correct position for the event, I have a simple illustration here. If this line represents the total minutes in a day, and this is the height of the container, so for any event, let's say the event starts at 10 AM, then we can calculate what percentage of time, what percentage of minute has been passed. So which we can get by minutes passed divided by the total minutes in a day. We'll get some percentage value, and let's say the value is X. Now to get the top position of the event, we will multiply that value with the total height of the container and we'll get the exact position of the event. So let's go back to our code and implement it. Now to make use of the height of the container, we need to store the ref of the container div. So I'll create a state that will store the ref of the container div. I'll name this ref and set ref, which I'll get from use state. Initially this will be null, and HTML div element or null. Now here in the parent container, I'll get a ref and I'll set the ref to be. Okay, now let's get the height of the container. I'll name the variable container height, which you will get from ref dot offset height. When the ref is null, I'll just set the value to be 1. And now we need to also calculate the minutes passed for the event and the total minutes in a day. So I'll store the total minutes in a day into a constant equal to 24 hours into 60, which will be the total minutes in a day. Okay, now to get how many minutes has passed from the start of the day to the start of the event, I'll use the function difference in minutes, and the date will be e dot start date and the end date will be today. Okay, this will give us the total minutes that has passed. Now let's calculate the percentage equal to minutes passed divided by total minutes. This will give us what percentage of minutes has been passed. Now the top position will be percentage into container height, and I'll simply return top here. Let's see. Okay, looks like the event is starting from the correct position. Let's test if our logic work. Let me make the event start from 9 AM. Alright, looks good. Now we also need to give the correct height for the event. So using the similar principle, what we can do is we can calculate the duration of the event in minutes. So event duration equal to difference in minutes. So this time the difference will be e dot end date comma e dot started, which will give us the total duration of event in minutes. Now height will be event duration divided by minutes, total minutes, into container height. This will give us the height of the event. Okay, let's go back to the UI. Alright, let's test if the correct height is being shown. So I will span the event from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Okay, looks good. These lines are actually coming above our event, so let's increase the jet index of the event. For now, I'll just simply return jet index 5. Alright, looks good. Now if we check in the Google Calendar, we are also displaying the start time and end time of the event. So let's replicate a similar view. After the event title, I'll give a line break here and display a span, which will have a format and event dot started, and the format will be as MMA. Okay, let's see how it looks. 10 a.m. We also need to show the end time, which will be format and date, and the format will be H, MM and A. Okay, this looks good. Now let's create another event. Instead of having a single event, I will have an array of events, and we will map through the list of the events and display the events. I'll make this from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 11 to 12, or let me make this 11:30 to 12:30. Okay, now let's map through the event. Instead of simply displaying the event, I will map through the events. Map, here I'll get the event and display the div inside the map. We also need the key, so I'll just get index from here and pass in the key to be. Okay, now we don't have the type for the list of events, so I've actually already defined this in the file events.ts, which will have ID, title, start date and end date. So I'll go back here and give this a type of event type, which will be array of event type. We also need to pass ID here. I'll give this ID of 1 and ID of 2. Okay, and here for the event style function, I'll give this a type of event type. Okay, alright, going back to the UI to make sure everything is running okay. Looks okay. Now let's try to display how the Google Calendar displays overlapping events. Right now, if we have two events that overlaps with each other, let's say I increase the ID here and make this ID f2. Let's say if one of the events starts from 10 and another one starts from 10:30 to 11:30, the events will not be displayed properly. If we look at the Google Calendar, if we just have two events here, the second event starts from somewhere in the middle and the first event does not take up the full width but ends somewhere up to 80% or even 90% of the width. And let's try to implement this. To display the overlapping events in a similar view, I have an illustration here. Right now we have the list of events in a single linear array. With a bit of an experimentation, I found it much easier to implement it if we group the events. Now, how do we group the events? First, the list of events should be sorted based on their start time, and then what I'll do is I'll get the first event, create a new group and place it as the first item of that group. Now I'll search through the rest of the events. Any start date of the event that falls within this interval will be placed in the single group. So in this case, the next event, which will be from 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. will also be placed in the single group. In this same group also, the event 10:45 to 11:45 will also be in the same group, but in the 11 a.m. 11:12 the start time does not fall within the 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. so this will be the first item of the next group. So we will have one group of events here and the next group of event will be 11:00 a.m. to 12:00 p.m. If we have some more events, we will search through the array and check if any event start date fall within this interval and place those events within this group, and we can do this recursively. Let's go back to the code and try to implement this. I have set up a list of events that overlaps with each other. I'll delete these events and import the events that I have prepared earlier, which will be from /events. So for the list of the events, what I have here is the first event will be from 12:30 to 1:30. Next will be 12:45 to 1:30 and so on. So let's go back to the UI and see how it looks. Now let's start grouping the events. So our group events will have a type of events will have a property events, which will be event type, array of event type. Okay, now let me create a function named group events, which will take array of events, and I'll also take a array of grouped events, which will be group events, and initially this will be an empty array. Okay, this will be a recursive function, so whenever the list of events is empty, we need to return the group event. So I'll check for the length of the events. If it's less than or equal to 0, I will simply return grouped events. Okay, now from the list of the events, we will first extract out the first event and search through the rest of the array to see if any event falls within that interval. So what I will do here is I'll name the event as first and rest will be called rest, which I'll get from events. Now I will search to the rest of the array and get all the events that falls within the interval of the first event. So I'll name this variable events in range, and I will filter through the list which will take event. Now I'll use the function from dateFNS is within interval. So the date will be event dot start date, and the interval will be start first dot start date, and end will be first dot end. Now the function is within interval is inclusive of the end date. If the first event ends at 11 a.m., we don't want the next event that starts from 11 a.m. to fall within the same group. So I'll actually use the function add first dot end date, and I'll subtract 1 minute from the end date, so it does not include the end time. Now let's create a group of these events. So I'll name the variable group. Will need to include the first event and all the events that falls within the range. Okay, this will be the group. Now that we have a group of events, if we go back to the illustration, since these 3 events are placed into a single group, we need to remove these elements from our list of events. Now let's remove those events from our list of events. I'll name this array sliced, which will be a array rest dot slice from events in range dot length. Now let's push our group into the grouped events. Actually, we should name this variable grouped events, and push our group to the grouped events array. Grouped events dot push group, and return by calling the group events function recursively. So I'll pass in the new array called sliced and pass the grouped events here. Okay, looks like we also need to so we need to make this an object with events. It should be group, and this is throwing us an error, so it will be a type of, this will return a type of grouped events. Grouped events. Okay, now let me create a variable named grouped events, which I will use the group events function and simply pass in the events. I'll export this variable and import it within our UI and simply log the grouped events for the time being. Okay, going back to the UI, if I refresh and check for the array, okay, the 0th index has 4 events, first index has 1 event. Now instead of mapping through the array of events, I'll actually map through the array of grouped events. So here what I will do is grouped events dot map, which will be group, and I will return group dot events dot map, which will give us an event, and I will simply return this div. Okay, and here we need the index to to be used as the key. Actually, let's give this, instead of index, let's use the event.id as the key. Now let's fix rest of the styles for the event. So to calculate the width dynamically, we'll also need to know the information about the group. I'll pass the group, and I also need to know the index. So I will take the index from the events map. Now our function only takes in event for the time being, so I will fix that. We will take in the group, which will be grouped events, and I'll also take index, which will be a now. To calculate the width, we need to know exactly how many events are there in a group. So I'll store this in a variable called events count, which will be group dot events dot length, and I'll also create a variable named const width percentage. So if there's only one event in the group, we need the event to take the 100% width. So this will be events equals events count equals 1, then we'll simply assign 1. Else what we will do is divide 1 by the number of events, and so Google Calendar for some reason multiplies this value by 1.7. So I'll do the same thing here, and instead of just returning 100% minus 127 pixel, what I'll do is I'll wrap this in another parenthesis and multiply this by width percentage. Now I'll need to change this into a template literal, so I will do that. If we go back to the browser, since there was only one event in this group, it's taking 100% width, and the rest of the event is taking some percentage of the width. Now we need to place the event based on when they start. So let's do that. So instead of giving the class of write 0, we will return the position of the event based on the index. So I will return another property called left, which will be a CSS function again, calc. Now I only want it to start after the site section, so I'll add 127 pixel here, and then I will add 100% multiplied by 1 divided by the number of events into the IDX. So this will make the event start according to its index. Okay, now let's give some border for the event to separate it out from each other. So I'll give this a class name of border, and border way 100. Okay, now looks like we also need to fix the jet index, so let's do that. So jet index will be 5 plus index. So each event will come on top of the other. Okay, now there's one more fix that we have to do. If we look at the last event, it's actually being clipped off from the container. So what we will do is we'll actually check if the event is the last event or not. So with that I can do by comparing the index with the events count. So if the index is equals to events count minus 1. This will be the last element. So if is last, let's actually decrease the width percentage. So width percentage will be 1 divided by the number of events, and this is not left, it should be left. Okay, now the reason I did that is because if you go to the Google Calendar, the last event is not as long as the previous 2 events, so that's why I try to make it shorter. Okay, now we also want the event to start from the right 0 instead of giving it the left position if it's the last event. So what we can actually do is store this in a variable named styles, and I'll simply return this is not left. Okay, but if it's the last event, what I will do is return styles and left right will be 0. Then let's fix this by changing this to a const, and I'll actually remove this and return the styles like this. If we go back to the UI, all right. Okay, although it does not exactly look like Google Calendar, we were able to replicate a UI that looks similar. This will be all for today. I hope you guys like the video. See you in the next one.